Don't know if you're as lazy as I am, but I've got more than a few little shop projects I've been putting off because, frankly, I just haven't felt like dealing with them. The list is long, but I've got 3 priorities I'm hoping to get through. Now, this is ambitious for me, so no promises. We'll see how far we get. First, I'd like to deal with the platen on this rotary weld table. I don't know if you remember back when I made this, probably told you the aluminum top was only temporary. Well, if it hadn't worked loose, I would have been perfectly happy with it still being temporary. But a few bad but very key decisions were made that has led to its demise. This is aluminum, and the shaft it goes onto is steel. At the time, I decided to press fit them together, and that worked great at first. But as it turns out, the top of a rotary weld positioner, well, it can get very hot. Come on, I mean, who would have seen that one come? It's worked itself loose. I've shimmed it a few times just to make do, but now it's just wallered out nice and proper, as they say. I'd also like to make some replacement inserts for my vertical bandsaw. Maybe it doesn't look like much, or heck, maybe it looks long overdue. I mean, what do I know? It doesn't look like much to me. But small trimmings have a nasty habit of getting sucked down there. And I'm worried one of these days a little piece is going to wedge itself between this part and the blade, and it's probably not a good thing. I've got this, I think it's PVC. It's a smidge thinner. I'm undecided about whether to just run with it. I think I just might. While we're at the bandsaw, I may try to tackle new blade guides. They're worn and I have some thinner saws I have no guides for. The problem there is not having a slitting saw of the proper thickness. The saw blades are 25 thou. Thinnest slotting or slitting saw I have is 20 thou, which is too thin. The next size is 40, which of course is too thick. I'm going to try to modify this, grind it down to 0.25. And that, frankly, might be the end of this video right there. I've never tried anything like this thin. Then I saw Stefan's video on slotting saws and thought, well, dang. So if I can get through this list, I'll be happy. Motley mix, but perhaps you'll like following my misadventures. Though I'm not quite sure what I'll call this video. Perhaps something quaint, like odds and ends.
No. Hello, YouTube. I'd like to file a cease and desist. I don't care what it's called. You know what I mean. I have been infringed upon and I will not stand for this. Yeah, it's this old Tony. Just like it sounds, but fine. You got a pencil or a computer or something? SUBSC.
This is a drop I picked up at a local plasma shop. It's a bit bigger, but thinner than the aluminum one. Could have been a little thinner. As is, it adds quite a bit of weight to an already heavy positioner. But I'd like to tap holes in the top, and this gives me some thickness for threads. I also have this small 4-jaw chuck. It's also an import, but a little better than the old one I had and perhaps a better size. I still think a wood turner's chuck might have been better, like larger diameter but thinner profile. I bought this for a different project, but if this works out, I'll pick up another one. Now this plate does have an entry wound from the plasma cut. This is an offcut. This is the middle of some part that needed a big hole in it. Now, up until about 10 seconds ago, I was going to turn this down, reduce the diameter, and cut past that pierce. I wouldn't want to have to deal with that gouge every time it comes rolling around and maybe catching a glove. Then it dawned on me that I could probably just weld that out. I know a lot happened fast, especially for that crowd that likes following along at 1.5 speed, but nothing really groundbreaking. I kind of went a little freestyle with this, made it up as I went along. Faced both sides, and then drilled and tapped 4 larger holes that will accept the chuck. In addition, I slotted it in one direction with a larger, sort of, I guess, countersunk slot in the bottom. That's for the screw heads. And the other direction is just a series of tapped holes. I mean, if this doesn't cover my bases, frankly, I'd probably just tack weld the part right to the platen. That ought to teach it. Next, I'll install it on the gearbox shaft. This just slipped right out of the rotary table. For anyone who hasn't seen the build, it's just a snap ring and a washer keeping it inside the gearbox. This is currently sized for a press fit. This gets pressed in from the back. I'm going to press it and then weld it in from the top. I think technically just the press fit should be okay. Now they're similar metals, but with any luck, this is the last platen I'll need to build, so doesn't bother me to weld it in place. I'm going to do that quickly off camera, push it in with the press and do a quick small weld, and I'll meet you back at the lathe. Once this is installed and it's one piece, I can clean up the edge. And that should be it. See you in a minute. I'm happy with that. I don't know why I didn't just do it right the first time. And that almost wraps it up, if not for one thing. If any of you went to welding acting school like I did, you'll remember the first rule they drilled into you. If you introduce a rotary table in the first act, you'd better be welding something by the second. In fact, to mix it up a little, let's try stick welding on it. I actually have yet to try the stick welding on this HTP. Let me find some scrap we can weld on and dig out the little stingy bit. I think I've got all the right doodads attached and in the right places. And now I think I just toggle this over to stick and dial in how many years it's been since I've stick welded. Let's call it 110. Let's see if we can't get this piece of tubing to stick. I did hit that on the belt sander and then just figured the plate was probably good enough like that for stick welding. I'm going to put a bending die on here just to keep it from moving around. I don't think I'm going to bother with tacking it down. My wife was nice enough to give me 2 of her 70/18s. She winked at me, told me to make them count. I have no idea if this is the right or even a good speed. I'm just going to light it up and see how it goes. What was that all about? That's not how I remember stick welding sounding. Let me bump it up to 100. Okay, I cleaned the parts. Maybe I'm not getting a good ground. Did she give me bum electrodes? All right, I think I figured out what's going on. Try this again. Stick welding's a lot more violent than I remembered. So I ran 2 of these in order to get the 2 points of view with the camera. The one on the left was the original setting. What was that, 100 to 110? The one on the right was cooler, I think 95 amps and slower table travel. And I'm happy with both of them. All right, anyway, enough with the screwing around. I'm happy with how that platen turned out. Give me just a moment to clean up and we'll get to the bandsaw fixes. I've also got to open everything up and air this place out. Those 2 70/18s like fumigated my entire garage. Almost forgot, the reason the stick welder wasn't working in the beginning there, I'm testing out an electronic amp controller and it was still plugged in. As soon as I pulled out that amp control, the welder went back to normal. That terrible sound we were hearing was the HTP doing its best trying to push 50 milliamps through a 70/18. Just so no one out there finds themselves wondering what Willis was talking about, the new inserts I'd like to make fit here in the bandsaw. What can happen sometimes if I'm trimming small pieces off my work, those small pieces can get kind of sucked and dragged down into this gap between the saw and the insert. And frankly, it can get a bit scary. We've got to stop the saw, either take the table apart or fish it out with some needle nose pliers. A new insert would have a tighter fit and hopefully minimize the number of traumatic incidences like that. If I only wanted one, I would just cut the shape out with the saw itself and then do the final fitting probably with the belt sander or a file or a knife or something. Since I'd like 3 or 4, I'm going to do this on the CNC router. And before we can do anything at all on the router, we'll have to get these dimensions and a model into the computer. Since the dimensions here aren't very critical and I just kind of want to get through this as quick as I can, I just surfaced the top of an old piece of wood, like an old 2x4, and I've got a couple of clamps holding the plastic sheet down. I've marked out the murder scene just so I know more or less where I can zero the tool and cut my first part. Stuff is tougher than it looks. I deburred it a little bit with a razor. Oh, that fits pretty good. It's just a smidge low. Hard to say. 15 thou, 10 thou. I think that'll be all right. I'm not sure what that was meant to demonstrate. Small pieces? Anyway, I like how that fits. Let's make some more. So I cut 4, though I'm sure by the time the one in the saw wears out and I need to replace it, I'll long have lost these and just have to make them again. The moment we've all been waiting for. I don't know what to tell you here, so I think I'm just going to dig right in. That was a pain in the 28 thou. I took it to 28 thou. It's actually 27 and some change. 0276, 0277, somewhere in there. This leaves me a couple of thou clearance in the slot so the saw can actually move through it. Probably looks terrible on camera. It's the way I ground it. I don't have a rotary thingamajig. But it measures consistent. It's nice and smooth. Not that many burnt spots. Anyway, that's it for today. Gonna get some food in me. I'm going to leave this covered overnight. Hopefully that firms up a little bit and it doesn't blow apart when we try to make the cut. And here are the offending parts. Kind of funny, all this trouble for what are arguably the smallest parts of this entire bandsaw. The lower guide block isn't too bad. It was this upper block that's quite a bit more worn. I've actually had to grind off some of the front, some of the depth. The saw was sinking in too deep and the teeth were binding and making a racket inside the guide block. Here's probably the toughest part. What do I make the new guides out of? Immediately, my options are cold rolled steel, tool steel, which I can't harden, 4140, which I'm not even showing, probably a nightmare to slot that stuff, some phosphor bronze, though I only have it in round, though that might actually be a good choice, and some old cast iron that in a previous life was a surface plate. Tool steel is probably my best option, but again, no way to harden that. The guides that came with the saw, that are in the saw now, I'm almost positive are cast iron. I mean, when I cut the top guide down not long ago, it certainly walked like cast iron and quacked like cast iron. You know what? Let me see what the internet has to say. What up, Stefan? What are solid bandsaw guides made of?
Solid bandsaw guides are either made out of carbide or hardened tool steel. I would recommend 12842, which is also called
come on. What if I just use cast iron? This is the prepped blank. It's almost to size in thickness. There's about 5 thou left there. It's more than I need, a little bit bigger than I need. Essentially, it has to be big enough to hold on to in order to come in here with the slotting saw. And back on the surface grinder. This step is completely unnecessary for these parts, but I've never ground cast iron. Thought I'd give it a try. To boot, when I break these down into strips to cut out the guide blocks, the more precise they are, nice and square and to dimension, the better the chances are I'll hold on to them in the vise in the mill. For what these parts will actually be doing, surface grinding is completely superfluous. Might be hard to make out with the Sharpie marks, but I've scribed some lines, generally how I think I'll break up the block. I'm going to make 2 saw cuts across this, and those are scribed with some accuracy. The other lines are approximate. With any luck, I get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sets out of this. Now I know what you're thinking. Old Tony, 5 sets? Well, that's an odd number. This is going to be going about 70 RPM, 100 thou depth of cut, 2.5 millimeters. About 3 to 4 times the thickness of the saw. Though full disclosure, as I was mounting the saw to the arbor, I heard a weird sound. I'm afraid I have a crack in that thing. I looked at it under magnification and couldn't really see anything. I'm afraid the weird grinding patterns might be masking a crack. It's cast iron, so I don't think I'll be using coolant. Let's see what happens. Screw came loose on the saw arbor. Okay, I don't know if that broke because the screw came loose or because it bound up and it loosened the screw. In any case, my saw was mounted upside down. All right, feeling a little bit better about this one. This is 29 thou, by the way, 29.2. I really think that extra thou is going to make a difference. This is a piece I just cut out of my bandsaw. I'll put it back later. Okay, I'm pretty happy with how that fits. Could have maybe been a smidge deeper. That's a lot better than the guides that are in there now. This other slot, since I had to pick this one back up again after the first saw broke, I was a little unsure about just how accurately I could do that. Pick up the existing slot. Remember, they weren't ground to the same thickness and I had to flip the second saw over so it was mounted correctly in the saw holder. That said, I decided to just do a cleanup cut to finish depth for my thinner saw. So this would be for, I don't know, the 1/8 or 3/16 wood saw. And this is for the metal cutting blades. If you're wondering why there are only 7 there, one of them shot off of this chuck at the speed of light. I'm pretty sure it's gone forever. In cases like this, I don't know how much of a payoff there is for you, the viewer, but I don't know. Let's see if there's any discernible difference in cut quality. This is hot rolled steel. As a hobbyist, I'd call that acceptable. Thanks for having stuck around.